Welcome to the TEA Child Find Evaluation and Art Supports Network training session regarding the legal requirements and best practice for local education agencies to follow when obtaining informed consent for conducting full and individual initial evaluations, re-evaluations when additional data is necessary, and initiating special education and related services. Please note that this presentation is copyrighted by the Texas Education Agency. If you have any questions or need any further information, please contact copyrights@tea.texas.gov. The Texas Education Agency's Office of Special Populations and Monitoring has adopted a True North statement to exemplify their promise to the students with disabilities in Texas. Together, we are committed to high expectations and strong systems that achieve equitable outcomes for every student with a disability. This presentation is an expansion of the Informed Consent Quick Guide document, which highlights key points and important resources regarding informed consent. This document serves as a quick reference guide and can be accessed on the TEA Child Find Evaluation and Art Supports Network website. The goal of this training is to review the legal definition of informed consent. The presentation will also cover in detail the required elements of informed consent, the legal requirements for obtaining informed consent for special education evaluation and services, and the benefits of having a clear, dedicated informed consent process. Participants will learn the definition and requirements of informed consent, importance of following legal requirements for obtaining informed consent, best practice when obtaining informed consent, and key points to remember when obtaining informed consent. As we explore the importance of informed consent, we're going to focus on when informed consent is required. Federal and state law and regulations give specific requirements for obtaining informed consent for full and individual initial evaluations, or FIIEs, initiation of special education services, and re-evaluations. Regarding obtaining consent for an initial evaluation, there are a few special situations we want to cover. If the child is a ward of the state or is placed in foster care and is not residing with the child's parent, the LEA is not required to obtain informed consent from the parent for an initial evaluation if, despite reasonable efforts to do so, the LEA cannot discover the whereabouts of the parent of the child, the rights of the parents of the child have been terminated in accordance with state law, or the rights of the parents to make educational decisions have been substituted by a judge in accordance with state law, and consent for an initial evaluation has been given by an individual appointed by the judge to represent the child. Informed consent must still be obtained from the person or agency legally charged with making educational decisions for the student. If the parent of a child who is homeschooled or placed in a private school at parental expense does not provide consent for the initial evaluation or fails to respond to the LEA's request to provide consent, the LEA may not pursue the initial evaluation through mediation or due process hearing procedures, and the LEA is not required to consider the child as eligible for services. When obtaining informed consent for initiation of services, there are a few special situations we want to address. The LEA must make reasonable efforts to obtain informed consent for the initiation of services. If the parent refuses to respond or refuses to consent to the initiation of special education and related services, the LEA may not use the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, including the mediation or the due process procedures, in order to obtain agreement or a ruling that services may be provided to the child. The LEA will not violate its obligation to provide a free and appropriate public education when the parent does not respond or refuses to consent to the initiation of special education services, and the LEA is not required to convene an art committee meeting or develop an IEP for the student. There are also some special situations related to obtaining informed consent for reevaluation that are important to know. The LEA must make reasonable efforts to obtain informed consent for a reevaluation when new assessment data is determined necessary. Parental consent for a reevaluation does not need to be obtained if the LEA can demonstrate it has taken reasonable measures to obtain such consent and the parent has failed to respond. Note that this does not apply when a parent refuses to provide consent. The LEA must make reasonable efforts to obtain informed consent for a reevaluation. If the parent of a child for whom is homeschooled or placed in a private school at parental expense does not provide consent for the reevaluation or fails to respond to the LEA's request for consent for reevaluation, the LEA may not pursue the reevaluation of the child by utilizing the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, including the mediation or the due process procedures, in order to obtain agreement or a ruling that the evaluation may be conducted. And the LEA is not required to consider the child as eligible for services. Now we are going to focus on the federal definition of consent and the requirements of federal and state law and regulations related to informed consent. Before we dive into the definition of consent, let's reflect on some key words that are critical to keep in mind when informing parents and guardians and adult students and obtaining their consent. Fully informed, native language, plain language, understands, agrees in writing, and voluntary. Let's begin our discussion of consent by reviewing the definition in the federal law and regulations. Many of us use this term regularly, but when was the last time we read through the federal definition and focused on each component and our responsibility as evaluation professionals and service providers for ensuring these are met when obtaining informed consent? As I read this first part of the federal law and regulations definition, please note any thoughts that come to mind regarding the current practice of your LEA. Consent. The parent has been fully informed of all information relevant to the activity for which consent is sought, in his or her native language or other mode of communication. On the next few slides, we're going to take a deep dive into what these terms mean. Fully informed of an evaluation means that you make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student clearly and completely understands why the evaluation is being recommended, including the multiple sources of data that led to the decision. Based on this data and that at the time of consent for evaluation is obtained, you should make the parent, guardian, or adult student aware of the possible educational disability condition or conditions that could result in their child meeting the criteria for special education and related services. This should not come as a surprise to the parent, guardian, or adult student at the time they receive the evaluation results. You should also provide the parent, guardian, or adult student a copy of the Notice of Procedural Safeguards and review the document with them. Fully informed of initiation of services means that you make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student clearly and completely understands special education services and supports being recommended, including the multiple sources of data that led to the decision. You should also provide the parent or guardian or adult student a copy of the Notice of Procedural Safeguards and review the document with them if informed consent for the full and individual initial evaluation was obtained the previous school year. This will ensure your LEA meets the requirement to provide this document to the parent or guardian at least once per school year. Fully informed of reevaluation means that you make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student clearly and completely understands why the reevaluation is being recommended, including the multiple sources of data that led to the decision. Based on this data, at the time of consent for evaluation is obtained, you should make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student is aware of the possible educational disability condition or conditions that could result from their child meeting the criteria for special education and related services. This should not come as a surprise to the parent, guardian, or adult student at the time they receive evaluation results. You should also provide the parent, guardian, or adult student a copy of Notice of Procedural Safeguards and review the document with them. If information from an outside service provider, other individual, or agency is needed as part of the proposed activity, you must inform the parent, guardian, or adult student and obtain their written consent. For example, if the child's physician needs to be contacted for input regarding ADHD and completion of an other health impairment form, this must be fully explained to the parent, guardian, or adult student, and the parent, guardian, or adult student must give written consent. A separate consent for each provider detailing the information or records that will be requested or released is required. This consent only pertains to the current evaluation or services. If consent is needed for a future activity, additional consent specifically for that purpose will need to be obtained. You should explain all required elements of informed consent to the parent, guardian, or adult student in the language they best speak and understand. It is important to use all information known about the parent, guardian's, or adult student's language rather than relying solely on the home language survey. If school staff has had an interaction with the parent, guardian, or adult student indicating limited English proficiency, it is best practice to at least offer the parent, guardian, or adult student the opportunity to have an interpreter present during the meeting. When using an interpreter, make sure he or she has an understanding of the requirements of the process, including the importance of confidentiality. When obtaining informed consent for initial evaluation or reevaluation, the LEA must provide the parent, guardian, or adult student the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. The Special Education Information Center, or SPEDTEX, offers the Notice of Procedural Safeguards in a number of languages that you can access at their website. You must ensure that the parent, guardian, or adult student or other person authorized to give informed consent is being provided all relevant information in the mode of communication they use and understand. For example, it may be necessary to use an ASL, American Sign Language, interpreter for parents, guardians, or adult students who are deaf or hard of hearing, if appropriate. Always consider the level of understanding and unique accessibility needs of the parent, guardian, or adult student when explaining the consent process, and adjust your words and presentation of the information to meet the individual's needs. Now we're going to take a closer look at the federal definition of consent. The definition describes the parent understands and agrees in writing to the carrying out of the activity for which his or her consent is sought, and the consent describes that activity and lists the records, if any, that will be released and to whom. So what is the benchmark for parent, guardian, or adult student understanding? What does agrees in writing mean? What do you need to share about the evaluation or services being proposed? What does a parent or guardian or adult student need to know about the potential release of records? Let's explore these questions in more detail. On the next few slides, we're going to take a deep dive into what these terms mean. It is important for you to use plain language and avoid technical and legal jargon when obtaining informed consent. It is also best practice to have a face-to-face meeting with the parent, guardian, or adult student to obtain the consent. This helps you build rapport and establish a relationship with the parent, guardian, or adult student, gives you the opportunity to gather some preliminary parent, guardian, or adult student information, allows the chance for the parent, guardian, or adult student to ask questions, and for you to check for understanding. Whenever possible, consent for evaluation should be obtained by a professional with training and expertise to fully explain the legal requirements, evaluation tools and procedures, and conditions being evaluated, as well as answer any questions the parent, guardian, or adult student may have. This is typically the licensed specialist in school psychology, or LSSP, the educational diagnostician, or the speech language pathologist, or SLP, depending on the scope of evaluation and which professional is serving as the evaluation manager. If your district procedures assign this responsibility to other staff, such as a campus administrator or a school counselor, evaluation personnel should contact the parent, guardian, or adult student prior to beginning the evaluation to ensure they have been provided informed consent and thoroughly understand what is being recommended. A written signature is legally required for informed consent. Consent for evaluation or the initial provision of special education and related services cannot be obtained via a verbal agreement. Simply sending home consent paperwork for parent, guardian, or adult signature, or asking a parent, guardian, or adult student to sign the consent form without fully explaining all the components of the activity does not equal informed consent. The Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, answered in a June 2020 question and answer document that LEAs may use electronic signatures so long as the public agency, or LEA, ensures there are appropriate safeguards in place to protect the integrity of the process. As we've emphasized, it is best practice to meet with the parent, guardian, or adult student face-to-face to obtain informed consent. When this is not possible, there are important steps you, as school evaluation personnel, should take to make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student is fully informed and is provided the opportunity for meaningful participation in the evaluation process. First, reach out to the parent, guardian, or adult student via email or phone to notify them of the proposed evaluation and that you will be sending home the prior written notice for proposed evaluation describing the purpose and the areas of recommended assessment for their review. At this time, also inform the parent, guardian, or adult student that you will then follow up to schedule a virtual or phone conference with them to explain the evaluation process in detail and give them an opportunity to ask questions. Once you have completed this conference and can verify that the parent, guardian, or adult student fully understands the evaluation process, send the evaluation consent form home to the parent, guardian, or adult student for their written signature. You can also obtain electronic signature if permitted by your LEA's operating procedures. When obtaining informed consent, you must thoroughly describe all of the aspects of the activity being proposed by the LEA. When seeking consent for an evaluation, explain to the parent, guardian, or adult student the evaluation process and procedures for evaluating in all areas of suspected disability. The parent, guardian, or adult student should also be informed of all members of the school-based multidisciplinary team who will be taking part or may potentially take part in the evaluation. Relevant information to the evaluation, including that the multidisciplinary team will be using both informal measures such as review of records, teacher, parent, guardian, and/or student input and interviews, and observations, as well as formal measures, including normed reference, standardized assessment instruments, and rating scales in the student's native language or other mode of communication to address academic, developmental, and functional performance. the parent, guardian, or adult student must complete and sign a separate consent to release or request information for each outside service provider. When obtaining informed consent for special education services, the LEA should have proposed, reviewed, and developed an IEP for the student. The LEA must ensure that the parent, guardian, or adult student fully understands and agrees with the decisions made about special factors related to the area of disability, the annual goals to meet the student's unique needs and how progress will be gathered and reported, the special education and related services, including the frequency and duration of each service, supplementary aids and services in order to advance towards goal attainment, be involved in the general curriculum and participate in extracurricular non-academic activities with children without disabilities, participation in state and district assessments, and determination of least restrictive environment after consideration of placement options. The third part of the federal regulations definition of consent addresses parent, guardian, or adult student revocation of consent. The definition reads, the parent understands that the granting of consent is voluntary on the part of the parent and may be revoked at any time. And if the parent revokes consent, that revocation is not retroactive. For example, it does not negate an action that has occurred after the consent was given and before the consent was revoked. And if the parent revokes consent in writing for their child's receipt of special education services after the child is initially provided special education and related services, the LEA is not required to amend the child's educational records, to remove any references to the child's receipt of special education and related services because of the revocation of consent. So, what does the term revocation mean? What does it entail with regard to informed consent? We'll answer these questions and examine key concepts related to the revocation of consent on the next few slides. An important part of the informed consent process is making sure that the parent, guardian, or adult student understands that providing consent for an evaluation or special education services is their choice, and they can change their mind at any time. If a parent, guardian, or adult student wishes to revoke consent for an evaluation or services, they must do so in writing. If the parent, guardian, or adult student requests revocation of special education services, the LEA should contact the parent, guardian, or adult student to fully explain and make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student understands the implications of this revocation for the student. It is very important to make sure the parent, guardian, or adult student understands that if they do revoke consent, that the revocation is not retroactive. This means that the revocation does not go back to the beginning of the activity and does not undo any action that has happened from the time informed consent was given and the date the parent, guardian, or adult student revoked consent in writing. For example, if a parent, guardian, or adult student submits a written request to revoke consent for an FIIE on day 25 of the 45 school day timeline, the information that was obtained and assessment that was completed prior to day 25 is not erased. If a parent, guardian, or adult student provides consent for initial special education services and then later revokes that consent in writing after services have already begun, the LEA does not have to remove any documentation or references from the student's education record regarding the child previously receiving special education or related services. A case in point, if a student was identified as having the educational disability condition of a specific learning disability in the area of reading comprehension and had been receiving special education services in the resource setting, this information would still be reflected in the student's educational record since it occurred before the parent, guardian, or adult student revoked consent for services in writing. Now that we have examined in detail the definition of informed consent according to federal regulations, let's tie it all together. Informed consent isn't simply a form or a signature. It's a process designed to ensure that the person who is authorized to give consent is fully informed about the details of the activity being proposed, that he or she completely understands what the consent is for, and that the consent is voluntary. Let's take a few moments and write down some benefits and important reasons for following the process presented in this training for obtaining informed consent. For example, the most important reason: this process meets the legal requirements. Along with meeting the legal requirements, this process guarantees the parent, guardian, or adult student is fully informed of their rights and the process, and allows parent, guardian, or adult students the opportunity to ask questions and gain any clarification about the evaluation or services being proposed. When obtaining consent for an initial evaluation, taking the time to meet with the parent, guardian, or adult student in person to explain evaluation process and obtain consent allows the parent, guardian, or adult student the opportunity to meet you and perhaps see the environment in which their child will be tested. This establishes the beginning of a positive relationship and creates rapport and trust. Also, meeting with the parent, guardian, or adult student gives you the chance to do a preliminary parent, guardian, or adult student interview and obtain significant information early in the evaluation process so that you can fully plan the scope of the evaluation and obtain consent to contact physicians or other providers if needed. Plus, meeting with the parent, guardian, or adult student gives you the opportunity to gather information to determine other concerns or suspected disability conditions early in the evaluation process. Lastly, although this process takes time, this time and effort is well worth it. If the time is taken at the beginning of the process to ensure the parent, guardian, or adult students are fully informed and have the opportunity to ask questions, there is less likely a chance of a surprise or a potential disagreement later. We hope you now have a deeper understanding of the definition, requirements, and importance of informed consent, and that you will carry what you've learned into your practice as an LSSP, educational diagnostician, SLP, or other special education evaluation personnel. Resources supporting this training are listed on the following slides. We encourage you to reference these sources to further expand your knowledge and improve your practice. The legal framework is an essential reference for all special education evaluators and service providers. It is consistently updated so you can be assured you're getting the most current legal guidance. The TEA Child Find Evaluation and Art Supports Network is a valuable resource for special education evaluation personnel. The TEA Technical Assistance Manual provides valuable guidance on state requirements and best practice. Legal references regarding informed consent and/or ethical standards for educational diagnosticians, licensed specialists in school psychology, and speech-language pathologists are also provided so that you may read more about the requirements of these professionals. And finally, here are the websites for several professional organizations. We encourage you to consult your specific organization for additional recommendations related to the obtaining of informed consent from parents, guardians, or adult students. Thank you for spending part of your day to expand your knowledge and understanding of informed consent. Our TEA Child Find Evaluation and Art Supports Network is here to support you. Please reach out to us with any questions or comments.